The weight of eternity. The night was cold, impossibly cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and reminds you that you are alive, or in the case of Victor Drakenhart, that you have not been truly alive for over 1,000 years. He stood at the edge of the ancient balcony of his castle, watching the city below him pulse with life, with warmth, with all the things he had forgotten how to feel. Tomorrow would mark his 1069th birthday, and the thought filled him with nothing but emptiness, a hollow ache that had grown so familiar over the centuries that he sometimes forgot it was even there. The humans below moved through their lives with such beautiful urgency, rushing to meet friends, hurrying home to families, racing against the clock that would one day stop for them. And Victor envied them more than they could ever know, because for him, the clock had stopped long ago and he was left standing in frozen time while the world spun on without him. His castle sat on the highest hill overlooking the city of Ravensbrook, a place where old money and older secrets lived side by side, where the wealthy built their mansions on foundations that dated back to times when people still believed in monsters, times when they were right to believe. Victor had watched this city grow from a small village of farmers and craftsmen into the sprawling metropolis it was today, had seen generations rise and fall like waves upon the shore, had attended the funerals of people whose great-great-grandparents had not yet been born when he first walked these lands. He had been a king once, ruler of a vast vampire empire that stretched across continents, but that empire had crumbled centuries ago, destroyed not by enemies or hunters, but by something far more insidious, the simple passage of time and the changing of the world around him. Now he was the last of his kind, or so he believed, the final remnant of a species that had once commanded fear and respect in equal measure. The other vampires had either been destroyed by hunters over the centuries, or they had chosen to walk into the sunlight, ending their eternal existence rather than face another century of loneliness. Victor had considered that choice himself, many times, standing on this very balcony as the first pink light of dawn crept over the horizon, wondering if today would be the day he finally let go, finally allowed the sun to claim what the night had stolen so many years ago. But something always held him back, some stubborn spark of hope that refused to die no matter how many disappointments he suffered, some quiet voice in the back of his mind that whispered maybe tomorrow will be different, maybe tomorrow something will change. His butler, a human named James, who was the latest in a long line of families who had served the Drakenhart estate for generations, appeared in the doorway with a silver tray bearing a crystal glass filled with something dark and rich. James was 63 years old, and Victor had known him since he was a baby in his mother's arms, had watched him grow from a curious child into a thoughtful man, and he knew that in another decade or two, he would have to attend another funeral, say goodbye to another friend, and start the painful process of learning to trust a new face all over again. "Your evening refreshment, my lord," James said, his voice carrying the warmth of genuine affection that had developed over decades of service. "And if I may say so, you seem more melancholy than usual tonight, which is quite an achievement given your general disposition." Victor allowed himself a small smile, appreciating the gentle humor that James always employed to try to lift his spirits. "Tomorrow is my birthday, James, as you know, and while most beings look forward to such occasions, I find myself dreading it with increasing intensity each year because each birthday is simply another reminder of how long I have been alone, how many people I have lost, how much the world has changed while I remain exactly the same." James set down the tray and moved to stand beside his master at the balcony railing, looking out at the city lights with the same thoughtful expression that his father had worn and his grandfather before him. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about you, my lord, stories her grandmother had passed down through our family, and do you know what she always said was the most remarkable thing about you?" James paused, and when Victor shook his head, he continued. "She said that despite everything you have seen, despite all the loss and the loneliness, you have never once become cruel. You have never once let the darkness in your blood become the darkness in your heart. And she believed that meant there was still hope for you, still a chance that you might find what you have been searching for all these centuries." The words struck Victor more deeply than he would have expected, and he found himself blinking back tears that he had not shed in nearly 100 years. "Your grandmother was a wise woman, James, far wiser than I have ever been, and I miss her every day, just as I will miss you when your time comes, just as I have missed everyone who has ever mattered to me." That night after James had retired to his quarters and the castle had fallen into its usual silence, Victor found himself doing something he had not done in decades. He decided to walk among the humans, to descend from his hilltop sanctuary and move through the streets of the city below. He dressed simply, in dark clothes that would help him blend into the crowd, and he left the castle through a hidden passage that emerged in a quiet alley at the edge of the downtown district. The city at night was a different world from the one he observed from his balcony, louder and more vibrant and full of the kind of chaotic energy that made him feel simultaneously alive and completely out of place. Young people laughed and shouted as they moved between clubs and restaurants. Couples walked hand in hand along the riverside path, And everywhere he looked, Victor saw the connections he had been denied, the simple human bonds that had become impossible for him the moment he was turned into the creature he now was. He found himself drawn to a small cafe on the corner of Maple Street and Cathedral Avenue, a quiet establishment called the Midnight Garden that seemed to attract a different crowd than the rowdy bars nearby. The patrons here were quieter, more introspective, dressed in dark clothing and speaking in hushed tones about art and music and the mysteries of existence. Victor felt something stir in his chest as he pushed open the door and stepped inside, something that might have been recognition, or perhaps just the ghost of a memory from a time when he too had been young and searching for meaning in a confusing world. That was when he saw her. She was sitting alone at a corner table, a book open in front of her and a cup of tea growing cold beside it, and something about her made Victor stop in his tracks as if he had walked into an invisible wall. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with hair as black as midnight that cascaded over her shoulders in waves, and her skin was pale, almost as pale as his own, contrasting sharply with her dark lipstick and the silver jewelry that adorned her ears and neck. She was dressed entirely in black, a style that humans called Goth, and she seemed completely absorbed in her reading, unaware of the ancient creature who was staring at her with an intensity that surprised even him. There was something about her that felt different from the other humans he had encountered over the centuries, something that called to him in a language he did not understand but felt deep in his bones. He had seen beautiful women before, had loved and lost more times than he cared to remember, but this was different somehow. This felt like fate reaching out and grabbing him by the heart, demanding that he pay attention, insisting that this moment mattered in ways he could not yet comprehend. The girl looked up from her book, and their eyes met across the crowded room, and Victor felt something he had not experienced in over 1,000 years, a genuine smile spreading across his face, unbidden and unstoppable, as if his body remembered how to feel joy even when his mind had forgotten. She did not look away. Most humans, when they met Victor's gaze, felt an instinctive fear, an ancient survival mechanism warning them that they were in the presence of a predator and they would quickly find somewhere else to look, pretending they had never noticed him at all. But this girl held his gaze with a curiosity that bordered on challenge, as if she were the one evaluating him, deciding whether he was worth her attention, and Victor found himself utterly captivated by her boldness. He walked toward her table, his heart beating for the first time in centuries, and when he reached her side, he said the first words that came to his mind: "You seem to be the only person in this room who is not afraid of the dark." She smiled, and her smile transformed her face into something radiant and mysterious, and she closed her book and gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Afraid of the dark," she said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "I have spent my whole life looking for something real in the darkness, something true, something that goes beyond the shallow brightness that everyone else seems to worship. So why would I be afraid of the only place where I have ever felt at home?" Her name was Luna Blackwood, she told him, and she was a student of folklore and mythology at the local university, spending her nights researching ancient legends and forgotten histories while everyone else was busy chasing dreams that would never fulfill them. She spoke about vampires and werewolves, about ghosts and spirits and all the creatures that lurked in the shadows of human consciousness, and Victor listened with growing amazement as she described with perfect accuracy things that he had witnessed firsthand, things that no human should have been able to know. "And what brings you to this cafe on this particular night?" she asked, leaning forward with genuine interest. "You have the look of someone who is searching for something, someone who has been looking for a very long time." Victor considered his response carefully, weighing how much truth he could safely share with this remarkable woman who seemed to see right through him. "Tomorrow is my birthday," he finally said, "and I found myself wanting to remember what it felt like to be around people who still believe in magic, who still think that the world holds more mysteries than it has revealed." Luna's eyes sparkled with an understanding that seemed impossible for someone her age. "And how old will you be tomorrow, if you do not mind my asking?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications, and Victor found himself at a crossroads, a moment of decision that would either lead to connection or to the familiar safety of solitude. He could lie, as he had lied countless times before, claim to be 30 or 40 and continue playing the role of just another lonely human. But something about Luna made him want to tell the truth, made him believe that she might actually understand, might actually accept him for what he truly was. "I will be 1,069 years old," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "and I have been alone for most of that time, watching the world change around me while I remain frozen in place, and I had given up hope of ever finding anyone who might understand what that kind of loneliness feels like." Luna did not laugh, did not recoil in fear, did not call him crazy or suggest he seek professional help. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand on his, and her touch was warm, so impossibly warm against his cold skin, and she looked at him with eyes that held no judgment, only compassion. "I know what you are," she said softly. "I have always known, ever since I first started reading the old stories. ever since I first felt drawn to the darkness in ways that my family could never understand, and I have been waiting my whole life to meet someone like you, someone who could show me that the magic I believed in was real." And then, before Victor could respond, before he could process what was happening, Luna leaned forward and pressed her lips against his in a kiss that was gentle and fierce all at once. A kiss that tasted of hope and longing and something that felt terrifyingly like love. The moment their lips touched, something inside Victor shattered. Some wall he had built around his heart 1,000 years ago came crashing down, and for the first time since he was turned, he felt truly alive. But as they pulled apart, both breathless and trembling with the magnitude of what had just happened, Victor noticed something that made his blood run cold. Through the cafe window, he could see a figure standing in the shadows across the street, watching them with eyes that glowed red in the darkness, eyes that belonged to a creature he had believed dead for 500 years. The vampire who had created him, his maker, the ancient monster who had cursed him with eternal life and then disappeared without explanation, was standing outside the cafe, and the expression on his face promised that everything was about to change. Shadows of the past. The figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared, melting into the darkness between heartbeats, leaving Victor staring at an empty street with his heart pounding in his chest for the first time in centuries. He tried to convince himself that he had imagined it, that the kiss with Luna had overwhelmed his senses and caused him to see things that were not there, but he knew better. He had spent too many centuries learning to trust his instincts, too many years surviving by recognizing danger before it could strike, and every fiber of his being was screaming that what he had seen was real. "Is something wrong?" Luna asked, her voice pulling him back from the edge of panic, and he turned to find her watching him with concern etched across her beautiful features, her hand still resting on his, her warmth still flowing into his cold flesh like sunlight filtering through clouds. Victor forced himself to smile, to push the fear aside and focus on the extraordinary woman sitting before him, because whatever horrors his past might hold, this moment was too precious to waste on ancient terrors. "Forgive me," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I thought I saw someone I knew, someone from a very long time ago, but I was mistaken. It must have been a trick of the light, or perhaps just the confusion of feeling something I had forgotten I was capable of feeling." Luna studied his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed, vulnerable, as if she could see through his carefully constructed walls and glimpse the frightened creature hiding behind them. "You are a terrible liar for someone who has had 1,000 years to practice," she said, but her tone was gentle, free of accusation. "Whatever you saw clearly frightened you, and I want you to know that you can tell me the truth, even if you think the truth is too dark or too dangerous for me to hear." The cafe around them continued its quiet rhythm, customers coming and going, the soft murmur of conversation mixing with the gentle music playing from hidden speakers, and Victor realized that he was facing another choice, another moment where he could either retreat into the safety of deception or take a step toward genuine connection. Luna had already proven herself to be extraordinary, had already shown him that she was not afraid of the darkness, and something told him that she could handle whatever he needed to share. "The creature who made me what I am," Victor began, choosing his words with care. "The ancient vampire who turned me over 1,000 years ago and taught me to survive in this shadowy existence. I saw him standing outside the cafe, watching us through the window, and that should be impossible because I witnessed his destruction 500 years ago, watched him burn in the sunlight of a dawn he had chosen to face rather than continue living in a world that no longer needed monsters like us." Luna's expression shifted from concern to something more complex, a mixture of curiosity and what might have been recognition, and she squeezed his hand more tightly before speaking. "Perhaps he did not die that day," she said softly. "Perhaps the destruction you witnessed was a deception, a way of escaping his responsibilities without facing the consequences of his actions, or perhaps there are things about your maker that you never knew, secrets he kept even from those he created." The way she spoke suggested knowledge beyond what any normal human should possess, and Victor felt his suspicion growing alongside his fascination with this mysterious woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly. "You speak as if you know something about my past," he said carefully, "as if you have information that has been hidden from me, and I need you to be honest with me, Luna, because I have spent too many centuries being deceived by people I trusted, and I cannot bear to walk that path again." Luna was silent for a long moment, and Victor watched emotions flicker across her face like shadows cast by candlelight, saw her wrestling with something internal, some secret that she had been carrying. Finally, she looked up at him with eyes that glistened with unshed tears, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My grandmother was a vampire," she said, "one of the last of the old families, and she fell in love with a human man, my grandfather, and somehow they found a way to have a child together. My mother, who was born half vampire and half human, a being that should not have been possible according to everything we know about your kind." She paused, gathering her courage. "I am the granddaughter of a vampire, which makes me 1/4 of your species, and that is why I have always been drawn to the darkness, why I have always felt like an outsider among humans, why I was sitting in this cafe tonight waiting for something I could not name until you walked through the door." Victor felt the world tilt beneath him as the implications of her words sank in. He had believed for centuries that vampires could not reproduce, that their species was doomed to extinction because new vampires could only be created through the painful and dangerous process of turning, a process that killed far more often than it succeeded. The existence of Luna, a living descendant of vampire blood, challenged everything he thought he knew and opened possibilities he had never dared to imagine. Your grandmother, Victor said, his mind racing through centuries of memories. What was her name? Elena Blackwood, Luna replied, though she was born Elena Morningstar before she took my grandfather's name and tried to hide from the hunters who had been pursuing her family for generations. The name struck Victor like a physical blow, and he felt the color drain from his already pale face as memories flooded back. Memories of a beautiful vampire with dark hair and silver eyes, memories of a woman he had loved centuries ago before war and betrayal had torn them apart. Elena Morningstar had been his closest ally in the old empire, had fought beside him against enemies both human and supernatural, and he had mourned her death for decades after receiving word that she had been destroyed by hunters in a distant land. Elena was my friend, Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. More than a friend, she was like a sister to me, and I was told she died over 400 years ago, burned alive in her castle by a mob of humans who discovered what she truly was. Luna shook her head slowly. She survived the attack by hiding in a secret chamber beneath her home, and she used the chaos of that night to fake her death and disappear from the supernatural world entirely, because she had discovered something that changed everything, something that made her want to leave the life of a vampire behind and try to find happiness among humans. What did she discover? Victor asked, though some part of him already suspected the answer. She discovered that she was pregnant, Luna said, which should have been impossible, but somehow it happened, and she knew that if the other vampires found out about her condition, they would either try to take her child as some kind of experiment or destroy both of them out of fear. So she chose to disappear, to raise her daughter in secret, to build a new life far from the shadows where she had spent so many centuries. The pieces were falling into place now, revealing a picture that Victor could hardly believe. A story of survival and love that had been hidden from him for 4 centuries while he suffered alone in his castle, mourning friends he thought were dead and enemies he thought were destroyed. If Alina had survived, if she had managed to have a child who then had a child of her own, then perhaps other things he believed were true were actually lies. Perhaps the world was far more complex and wonderful and terrifying than he had ever imagined. Is she still alive? Victor asked, hope and fear battling for dominance in his heart. She died 10 years ago, Luna said softly, when I was 12 years old, and she made me promise to keep our family's secret, to never reveal what we truly were. But she also told me that one day I might meet someone who would change everything, someone who would show me that I did not have to face the darkness alone. Before Victor could respond, his phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from James that read simply, there is someone at the castle gate, someone who claims to know you, someone who says he has been waiting 500 years to see you again. Victor's blood ran cold as he stared at the screen, knowing exactly who was waiting for him, knowing that the confrontation he had been dreading since glimpsing that figure outside the cafe was now inevitable. He looked up at Luna, seeing in her eyes the same determination and courage that he had loved in Alina all those centuries ago, and he made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. I need to go, he said, standing and offering her his hand. And I think you should come with me because whatever is about to happen, I have a feeling it involves both of us, and I would rather face it together than alone. Luna took his hand without hesitation, rising to stand beside him with the confidence of someone who had been waiting her entire life for this moment. Together, she said, and the word felt like a promise, like a vow, like the beginning of something that neither of them fully understood but both were willing to explore. They left the cafe and walked through the city streets toward the hill where Victor's castle stood silhouetted against the night sky, and with every step, Victor felt the weight of his long existence shifting, rearranging itself around this new reality. He was not alone anymore, perhaps had never been as alone as he believed, and the universe was far more interconnected than his lonely heart had allowed him to see. When they reached the castle gate, they found the figure waiting for them, standing in the moonlight with an expression that mixed regret with something that might have been hope. Victor's maker looked exactly as he remembered, tall and imposing with silver hair and eyes that held the weight of millennia, and when he spoke, his voice carried the same authority that had commanded armies of the undead. Happy birthday, my son, the ancient vampire said. I am sorry it took me 500 years to find the courage to face you, but there are things you need to know, truths that I have hidden for too long, and what I have to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about who you are and why you exist. Luna's hand tightened around Victor's, and he drew strength from her presence as he faced the creature who had given him eternal life and then abandoned him to suffer through it alone. Then tell me, Victor said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him, tell me everything. The ancient vampire smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes, the weight of secrets carried for too long. Your creation was not an accident, he said. You were chosen, selected from thousands of candidates because you possess something rare, something that could only appear once in a millennium, something that made you uniquely qualified to fulfill a prophecy that your kind has been waiting for since the beginning of our existence. What prophecy? Victor demanded. The ancient vampire looked at Luna with an expression of recognition and wonder, as if he was seeing something he had hoped for but never expected to witness. The prophecy speaks of a vampire king who would one day find his true partner, a being of mixed blood who could bridge the gap between our world and the human world, and together they would either save our species from extinction or destroy us completely, depending on the choices they make in the days to come. Victor felt the world spinning around him as the implications of his maker's words sank in. He looked at Luna, saw her eyes wide with shock and something else, something that looked like recognition, as if some part of her had always known that her destiny was linked to something far greater than herself. And you believe that Luna is this partner? Victor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I do not merely believe it, the ancient vampire replied. I have spent 500 years searching for her, following bloodlines and prophecies and ancient texts, and when I saw you kiss her tonight, when I felt the power that awakened in that moment, I knew that the prophecy was finally beginning to unfold. But before anyone could speak another word, the sky above them erupted with light, and a voice boomed from the heavens, a voice that carried the weight of ancient authority and terrible power. The prophecy has been activated, the voice declared, and the trial of the Vampire King has begun. You have 7 days to prove yourselves worthy, or the darkness will consume you both, and everything you love will burn. The heart of darkness. 7 days, the voice from the sky had declared. 7 days to prove themselves worthy of a destiny that neither of them had asked for or fully understood. Victor stood in the courtyard of his ancient castle with Luna at his side and his maker before him, and for the first time in over 1,000 years he felt genuinely afraid, not for himself, but for the remarkable woman who had stumbled into his existence and awakened something he thought had died centuries ago. Tell me about the trial, Victor demanded, his voice carrying an authority he had not used in decades, the voice of a king commanding answers from a subject who had been silent for far too long. The ancient vampire, whose name was Marcus Drakenhart, the progenitor of Victor's bloodline and one of the oldest creatures still walking the earth, lowered his head in acknowledgement of his creation's power. The trial consists of 3 challenges, Marcus explained, each designed to test a different aspect of your worthiness: your courage in the face of impossible odds, your wisdom when confronted with impossible choices, and your love when tested by impossible sacrifices. Luna stepped forward, her quarter vampire blood giving her a strength that surprised even Victor. And what happens if we fail? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear that Victor could sense beneath her brave exterior. If you fail any of the challenges, Marcus said gravely, you will both be destroyed, and the prophecy will be sealed for another 1,000 years, waiting for another vampire king and another partner to emerge from the endless cycle of hope and disappointment. The weight of their situation settled over them like a shroud, and Victor found himself reaching for Luna's hand, drawing comfort from her warmth and strength. They had known each other for only a few hours, had shared nothing but a single kiss and a handful of conversations, yet somehow it felt as if they had been connected across centuries, as if their souls had been searching for each other through the long darkness of time. We will not fail, Victor said, and he meant it with every fiber of his ancient being. The first challenge came at dawn, when the sky turned pink and gold and the sunlight that had been Victor's enemy for over a millennium began to creep across the castle grounds. A figure appeared at the edge of the property, a woman dressed in white who carried herself with the authority of divine purpose, and Victor recognized her immediately as a hunter, one of the ancient order dedicated to destroying vampires wherever they found them. Victor Drakenhart, the hunter called out, her voice carrying across the distance between them. I am here to test your courage, and the test is simple. You must walk into the sunlight and stand before me for 1 full minute without seeking shelter, and if you survive, you will have passed the first challenge. Victor felt his cold blood turn to ice at the thought of what she was asking. Sunlight was death to vampires, had been since the beginning of their existence, and no vampire in history had ever survived direct exposure for more than a few seconds. To stand in the sun for a full minute would be to invite destruction, to accept death in its most painful and absolute form. But he thought of Luna, thought of the future they might share if he could find the courage to face his greatest fear, and he realized that some things were worth dying for, some possibilities were worth any risk. I will do it, Victor said, and he began walking toward the hunter, toward the line where shadow ended and sunlight began. Luna cried out behind him, tried to stop him, but Marcus held her back, explaining that interference would automatically fail the challenge and doom them both. Victor could hear her struggling, could hear the anguish in her voice, and it gave him strength, reminded him that he was no longer fighting only for himself. When he stepped into the sunlight, the pain was immediate and overwhelming, like being burned from the inside out while simultaneously being crushed beneath the weight of 1,000 suns. His skin began to smoke, his eyes felt like they were melting in their sockets, and every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to find shadow, to do anything to escape the agony that was consuming him. But he kept walking. 10 seconds passed, and the pain intensified beyond anything he had ever experienced, worse than being turned, worse than watching everyone he loved die, worse than centuries of loneliness and despair. 20 seconds, and he could no longer see, could no longer feel anything except the all-encompassing fire that was destroying him cell by cell. 30 seconds, and he heard Luna screaming his name, heard the love and terror in her voice, and he clung to that sound like a drowning man clinging to a rope. 40 seconds, and something began to change. The pain was still there, still unbearable, but it was no longer growing, no longer pushing him toward destruction. It was as if his body had found some reserve of strength, some power that had been dormant all these centuries, waiting for this exact moment to emerge. 50 seconds, and the pain began to recede, the burning sensation giving way to something warm, something almost pleasant, like the memory of summer days from his human childhood, like the feeling of sitting by a fire with people he loved. 60 seconds, and the hunter's voice rang out across the courtyard. The challenge is complete. Victor opened his eyes and found that he could see, that his vision was clear, that the sunlight falling on his skin no longer burned but instead felt comfortable, almost welcoming. He looked down at his hands and saw that the damage had healed, that his flesh was whole, that something fundamental had shifted in his ancient biology. "You have proven your courage," the hunter said, and for the first time her voice carried a note of respect. "And in doing so, you have earned the first gift of the prophecy, the ability to walk in the sunlight, to exist in the world of the living as well as the world of shadows." Luna ran to him then, throwing her arms around him and holding him with a fierce desperation that told him everything words could not express. He held her back, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, and he allowed himself to believe that they might actually succeed, might actually survive this trial and claim the destiny that awaited them. The second challenge came at noon, when the sun was at its peak and Victor was still marveling at his newfound ability to exist beneath its rays. This time the challenger was an old man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, and he introduced himself as a keeper of knowledge, a guardian of the ancient wisdom that predated even the vampires. "The second challenge tests your wisdom," the old man explained, "and the test is a riddle that has never been solved in all the centuries it has been asked. Answer correctly and you pass, answer incorrectly and you fail." Victor nodded, steeling himself for whatever intellectual puzzle awaited him, but the old man did not ask him the riddle. Instead, he turned to Luna. "The riddle is for the partner," the old man said, "because wisdom is not meant to be carried alone, and a true king knows how to trust others to carry burdens he cannot shoulder by himself." Luna stepped forward, and Victor could see the determination in her eyes, the same fierce intelligence that had drawn him to her in the cafe. "I am ready," she said. The old man smiled and asked his question. "What is the one thing that grows stronger when given away, lighter when carried by two, and more valuable the longer it is shared?" Luna was silent for a long moment, and Victor could see her mind working, could practically hear the gears turning as she considered possibilities and discarded them. The seconds stretched into minutes, and Victor felt his anxiety growing with each passing moment. Finally, Luna spoke. "Love," she said simply. "Love grows stronger when given away because it multiplies in the heart of the receiver. Love grows lighter when carried by two because the weight of vulnerability is shared, and love becomes more valuable the longer it is shared because each moment adds new memories, new experiences, new reasons to cherish what you have found." The old man's smile widened into something radiant and beautiful. "You have answered correctly," he said, "and in doing so, you have earned the second gift of the prophecy, the ability to share your life force with your partner, to strengthen each other in times of weakness and heal each other in times of injury." Victor felt a surge of energy flow through him, a connection to Luna that went beyond physical or emotional, a bond that linked their very essences together. He could feel her heartbeat as if it were his own, could sense her emotions as clearly as he sensed his own, and he understood that they were no longer two separate beings but two halves of something greater. The third and final challenge came at dusk, as the sky turned red and purple and the first stars began to appear on the horizon. This time no challenger appeared, no figure stepped forward to present the test. Instead, Marcus approached them with tears in his eyes and a weight on his shoulders that seemed to crush him with every step. "The final challenge is mine to give," Marcus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "And it is the hardest of all because it tests your love, and the test requires the greatest sacrifice imaginable." He paused, gathering his courage, and when he continued, his words struck Victor like physical blows. "To pass the final challenge," Marcus explained, "one of you must willingly choose to forget the other, to erase all memory of your connection and return to the life you lived before you met. and the other must accept this sacrifice, must let go of the love you have found without fighting, without trying to undo what has been done. Victor felt his heart shatter at the thought of losing Luna, of returning to the endless loneliness that had defined his existence for so many centuries. He could not bear it, could not imagine facing another 1,000 years without her light in his darkness. I will make the sacrifice, he said immediately. I will forget, I will give up everything we have found because Luna deserves a life free from the burden of my ancient existence, free from the shadows that follow me wherever I go. But Luna shook her head, her eyes bright with tears but her voice steady with conviction. You have carried the weight of loneliness for over 1,000 years, she said. You have suffered enough, you have sacrificed enough, and I will not let you lose one more thing that matters to you. Then I will be the one to forget, she continued. I will return to my ordinary life, will continue my studies and my research, will never know that I found something extraordinary in a small cafe on an ordinary night, and you will keep the memories, will remember the love we shared, will carry that light with you through whatever centuries remain. Marcus watched them argue, watched them each fight to be the one who sacrificed, and something in his ancient eyes softened, some burden he had been carrying began to lift. You have already passed the challenge, he said quietly, and both Victor and Luna stopped their argument to stare at him in confusion. The test was never about actually making the sacrifice, Marcus explained. It was about being willing to make it, about loving someone so completely that you would give up everything to spare them pain, and both of you have proven that your love is strong enough, pure enough, worthy enough. The sky above them seemed to pulse with light, and that ancient voice spoke one final time. The trial is complete, the vampire king and his partner have proven themselves worthy, and the prophecy is fulfilled. From this day forward. They will serve as the bridge between worlds, the protectors of both humans and vampires, the keepers of the balance that maintains peace between the living and the undead. In the days that followed, Victor and Luna began to build something new, a life that honored both their humanity and their supernatural heritage. They opened their castle to vampires who had been living in isolation, created a sanctuary where the undead could find community and purpose instead of loneliness and despair. Luna continued her studies, but now her research had practical applications, helping to document vampire history and preserve the knowledge that had been in danger of being lost forever. Marcus stayed for a time, helping to establish the new order and making amends for his centuries of absence. He explained that he had faked his death because he had lost faith in the prophecy, had believed that vampires were doomed to extinction, and saw no point in continuing to watch his creations suffer. But seeing Victor and Luna together had restored his hope, had shown him that love could triumph over despair if only people were brave enough to reach for it. On the morning of Victor's 1069th birthday, he stood on his balcony watching the sun rise over Ravensbrook, and this time the light did not threaten him but instead welcomed him, filled him with warmth and possibility. Luna joined him, slipping her hand into his and leaning her head against his shoulder. "Happy birthday," she said softly. Victor smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and filled his heart. "Do you know what I wished for this birthday?" he asked. "Tell me," she replied. "Nothing," he said. "For the first time in over 1,000 years, I wished for nothing because I already have everything I could ever want." The kiss they shared then was not like their first kiss, desperate and hungry and full of longing. This kiss was gentle, patient, full of the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you have all the time in the world. And as the sun continued to rise and the city below began to wake, Victor understood that his story was no longer about endurance and survival, but about love and connection and the endless possibility of tomorrow. Some would say it was magic, the way a single kiss in a small cafe had transformed an ancient vampire's existence. Others would call it fate or destiny or the fulfillment of prophecy. But Victor knew the truth, knew that the real magic had nothing to do with supernatural powers or ancient predictions. The real magic was simply this: two lonely souls had found each other in the darkness, had chosen to reach out instead of retreat, had dared to believe that love was possible even when everything suggested otherwise. And in the end, that kind of magic was more powerful than anything the supernatural world could offer.